Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode. I think the word I'm looking for is episode. It's been one of those mornings. It's past the syrup, episode 3, having a nightmare, technical difficulties everywhere. 3 of the most experienced, high-quality estate agents I know in the room, and none of them know how to use Zoom. So there's definitely a joke there about how many estate agents it takes to mess up. I'll use the word mess up because it's early in the podcast, a podcast episode. So look, let's introduce the guys. First up, we've got R to the O to the... No, I'm not going to do it. We've got the lyrical estate agent himself, Rowan Waller. The most experienced in the room. We just assessed really quickly. So he's 1-0 up on the team. He's just had an elderly week away, sorry, with the elderly, and is feeling fresh as a daisy. He's got his Essex tan, looking pumped, feeling good. How's life, Rowan?
Oh, God, it's fine. I don't know if people are going to understand an elderly weekend away. Yeah, a weekend away in Centre Parks. In fact, a week away in Centre Parks for a 70th birthday. And yeah, he rocked it. So, but I was in a human soup in the Rapids, and I've come away feeling a little bit worse for wear. So yeah, forgive me if I start squeaking halfway through this podcast. There's
tiny little violins being played all around the world for you right now. You know that? But thanks for making it in, even though you're feeling under the weather. You look fantastic. And yeah, that description, elderly weekend away, is, yeah, I've done better than that in my time. That's I didn't do you proud there. I apologize. Next up, SJ, as I said to her just before we turned on the camera to film, I've got no idea about the level of experience because she's got so much of it and so much runs concurrently. She's currently with Preston Baker up in Yorkshire, who is one of my absolute hand on heart favorite estate agents in the whole country. What a business. I've known the guys that run that business for a long time, and I truly believe it's only started to do good things since SJ came on the firm about 15 years ago. So welcome, SJ. How's life?
Very good, thank you. Yes, it's almost sunny in Yorkshire, so it's time for us all to celebrate.
Time to celebrate because the sun is arriving. Almost, the sun is arriving. Yeah. Good stuff. And finally, we've zoomed him in from 1974 on the set of a porno. The Viking himself, Kristjan Byfield. We go way back. He's 20 years base property specialist next year, but the first ever awards, the business I used to be a part of, we sat at the same table, and Kristjan showed up in my holiday wardrobe. He loves a Hawaiian, and I was like, this guy's blowing my mind. I'm in a bloody dark suit, and he's showing up looking like this. The man, the myth, the legend, Kristjan. How's life?
Yeah, good, mate. How you doing?
Very good. Thank you for coming on, guys. We are going to dig straight into some news stories. We're going to get right down. Kristjan, is the helmet not staying on?
I mean, you know, you can do. It's as surprising as it might be. A huge metal helmet isn't necessarily the most comfortable headwear for.
Yeah,
let's roll with it for now.
See how long you last. Yeah. Okay.
So I'll tuck into that stuff as a painkiller in a minute, so it's all good.
Yeah, lucky you. So I wonder if guys know, because this gets released at 6 or 7 p.m. on a Wednesday evening, but we film on a Tuesday morning. So if you see Kristjan sipping a scotch, it's not like, oh, it's being filmed in live. It's Wednesday evening. Why not? No, my man's getting drunk at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning.
We nothing but respect. I've been up for like, a few hours.
Hey, look, it's 5 o'clock somewhere
in the world, isn't it?
Absolutely. The witching hour has passed somewhere. Do your thing, live your life. No judgment here, I assure you. Just jealousy. Yeah. So, we're going to kick off with something that sort of, I guess, a little bit caught my eye, mainly because so many people read it. It was interesting. There's a piece published, this week about stamp duty, and not necessarily whether it's time for stamp duty reform, but it did provide some data which I thought was quite interesting. So November 2017, the Chancellor made some changes to tax relief, stamp duty relief, specifically targeting first-time buyers. So what he did is he went to a zero stamp duty position under £300,000 purchase, and between £300,000 and £500,000 purchase, it was a flat rate of £5,000. I know, boring data. What's quite interesting though is they've done some reporting, and it looks like it's quite a significant impact. So people purchasing between 125k and 300,000, property transactions have increased by 11%. They think as a directly in relation to this stamp duty relief. And between 300,000 and 500,000, it's increased by 18%. Now, it's boring when I talk about data like that, But when you think 11% more transactions at the lower level and 18% more at the slightly higher level, that's a lot of people. When you think about, volume, positive impact on a huge number of people in terms of impacting pricing, you think, loads more people, there's loads more buyers, it's going to push prices up, it's going to penalize people. Well, actually, the differential on price, I think, was about 1%. So it increased property prices in that bracket by about 1%. For me, this is actually quite interesting because stamp duty reform comes up a lot. In 18 months, we've probably got a general election, which means, you guessed it, stamp duty reform will be on the cards. It will be on the agenda because it's something that voters like to talk about. So open dialogue, guys. What do you think? Is it time? Has it been time for the last 20 years? Do we want to reform? Rowan, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I think so. I think that I like to think of myself as a left-wing kind of liberal, but I'm absolutely with this kind of hard right Tory group of MPs that are talking about scrapping stamp duty altogether, which comes straight out of the Liz Truss camp, which I definitely do not sit in. But I think that the trouble with stamp duty that I see is that it's effectively a punitive tax. It taxes income that's already been taxed. And it also really stops people downsizing, and I think that's the biggest issue is that retired people who no longer have such an income to help support it wait in their houses longer because they really can't afford to pay this £30,000 stamp duty that they're going to have to downsize when they have no longer got income. So I think there's all sorts of things that need to be looked at, and I think rather than try and focus on individual groups, go, well, look, let's help first-time buyers, let's help pensioners. A stamp duty reform across the board, either scrapping it altogether or reducing it to something that is a low base stamp duty across the board, to almost like a transaction tax, but not in the sort of the tens of thousands of pounds that you can end up reaching, would grease the wheels of the market. It would help the market move, but it just wouldn't be this kind of barrier to moving that it puts on people. And I think the problem that we had, so actually the period you're talking about was 2017, was it? It's 2017 when they put that reform in. I can't even remember it being that far back, but obviously the stamp duty holidays that we have, where they scrap stamp duty altogether, but they put a deadline on it for how long it's going to be stopped for, that causes problems as well. So I think you've either got to reform it in one go, and then that's what it looks like moving forward. It's kind of what the last reform has been, right? They haven't put a deadline on what the current stamp duty reform is. But when they said, yeah, we're gonna I can't remember what the last one was, but we're not gonna have any stamp duty up to, well, I can't even remember what the price was, but it was going to finish in March, March the 31st, 2021. And there was so much transactional problems. There was so this build up of conveyancing going through that the industry almost collapsed on itself, and therefore they had to extend it by 3 months just to allow those transactions to go through. And that's the problem that we had. And all of that volume of transaction that we had in 2021, if you look at that year, it was all forced into the first half of the year because people were desperately trying to get their properties through to save themselves. On average, 15 grand in Oxford was the average saving, because our average property price was over £500,000. And then the second half of the year was a dribble right through to Christmas. So we didn't, normally you get a quiet summer, you get this nice boost in September that takes you through the new year. We just had none of that boost. So we had, we were just living off what we'd done in the first half of the year, desperate to get through to January and see if the market picks up again.
Yeah, that old classic, estate agents make the money and mostly will be spending it because you're expecting that second wave, second half of the year. That's interesting. So I want to just go back to one of the things you said that stops downsizers. SJ, do you think stamp duty is stopping downsizers from, at the end, I was going to use horrendous language there. At the end, no, we won't say that. Later in life, do you think it's stopping downsizers from downsizing and freeing up bigger properties, which we know we're in desperate need of in this country?
No, I don't. I'm sorry to disagree with you so blatantly, Rowan, but no, I don't. I think that there's a bigger problem when it comes to downsizers, in that there is this this stalwart attitude, and I saw it in my grandparents, of, I bought this house and I want to be carried out in a in a box. I don't want to live somewhere else. I don't want a flat. I don't want a bungalow. I bought a house I loved, and I'll do whatever modifications I can to that house to stay here as long as possible, because this is the house that me, my partner, my wife, my husband, we bought together, and this is where we want to stay. I think there's a lack of appropriate accommodation which they see themselves being able to live in. So if you think that, you know, when I talked to my grandfather, who passed away last year at the ripe old age of 95, still living in a 5-bed terraced house. Yeah, so he was belligerent to the end about living in this house. When we talked to him about properties, he was like, I don't want to go into somewhere where there's organized bingo nights and there's organized trips to the supermarket. He was like, that's not me. That's not who I am. I want to be independent. I want to live my own life. I want to do my own social events. And that sort of stuff is totally appropriate for a proportion of the market. But there's also a proportion of the market which needs something which is totally different. And
I sort of feel like there's an opportunity for like a Centre Parks retirement home for granddads like yours. You know, it's what a coincidence. Actually, Rowan is just okay. Sorry, Eshe, go on. I couldn't help myself there.
No, it's fine. So I think I think it's a broader problem. I think if anything, the stamp duty is a barrier to people moving up. I think there's so much negativity that comes out of the press. I emailed Ben yesterday saying, if you want well informed, I'm the least best person to put on this podcast, because I've deleted the news app. I don't read the trade press. I ignore the radio as much as I can when the news is on, because I can't control the macro stuff. I can control what happens with the team and the way I think, the way I present, the way I act. And so I think, given the fact that there's been so much negativity about rising costs and suppression of salaries and inflation and the impact, some people are just battening down the hatches and they don't want to upsize because they're too scared about the consequences of doing that. So I actually...
Go on, sorry, sorry.
No, please.
I was just going to say, I know more agents that take your view on mass market media, on news, I deleted my Sky News app middle of last year because the notifications are relentless, and it's never a notification saying, look at this wonderful news story, look at this happy news story, look at what's going on in the world that will put a smile on your face. You're just bombarded with the negativity because it's scare factor and people will read about scare factor. And so I'm conscious that I've picked these things that we're discussing. It could almost I could fall, or this show could fall into the same sort of category, that we're using things that sort of sound scary, but it's intentionally discussing things that are a bit of an issue to point out why really we shouldn't be worried about them. Exactly, to paraphrase, don't worry about the macro, worry about what you can control. And that might be the line of the episode. Well done, you got it so early. I lean towards where you are with the grandparents, that they just refuse to move on. But I question whether we have the right incentives in place in this country to help them move on, to make them want to move on. If you think about what happens when people move on and the taxation that's applied to their assets and their cash, is there a way to not penalise people in that way if they make a suitable move, if they help the economy in a wider way? It's almost too simplistic to say, if you downsize, we will look at your tax burden and ensure that your children or relatives are not penalised in the same way. It is an oversimplification, but there's definitely got to be something there that we could do, I'm sure, to help people move on and convince them that I know you want to be carried out of here, but your kids are on for 40% tax, and that you're just giving it to somebody you don't want to. But I'm waffling enough. Kristjan, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think stamp duty can definitely be simplified. I mean, I think all this tiered X% at X price only just confuses the market. I think it could be much simpler. It could just be 2% flat rate across the market. I think it should be on the seller, not the buyer, because then you're removing stamp duty from first-time buyers. So I think that sort of instantly implements a first-time buyer incentive. Or if someone wants to sell, move into rented for a while and then see what the market does and come back in. In terms of downsizing, I think the whole debate around downsizing, to be honest, is a bit of a load of bollocks. I think fundamentally, if we're talking about not enough family homes, that ultimately stems back to our government and a complete lack of housing strategy, because all it says to me is we're not building the right property. If there's a lack of family homes out there, it's not because our 90-year-old parents don't want to leave their family home with all those memories. And I think we always talk about the emotion of what we do and people's emotional attachment to properties. And for that reason, I don't think you can incentivize people to sell a property, because as SJ was saying, it's not about bricks and mortar, it's about who they bought that property with, it's about raising their kids in that property, it's about their own personal identity, it's about the journey they've been on transforming that property, it's all those things. And I don't think really you're going to see a major shift in the needle by offering an incentive here or there, because I think the driver behind it is much more emotive. And I think ultimately, look, at the end of the day, we're talking about people. None of us live forever, right? So eventually that house comes into the family. You know, talking about inheritance tax, what is it, £500,000 allowance per person? I don't think there's a lot of people inheriting property. I mean, there will be a segment, but I think the vast majority of people fall under that £500,000, because they might be left a £1.5 million house, but between 3 siblings. So I don't think necessarily inheritance tax comes into it that much. Are there incentives? You know, I don't think there would necessarily be a bad thing with offering some incentives, but then how do you benchmark those? Like, how do you quantify downsizing? Because you could move to a more expensive area, and so you can't judge it on price. Is it stipulated on bedrooms? Then how many bedrooms do you have to downsize by in order to qualify for it? I think it would just end up being a really quite complicated, messy mess. I think.
But that is what we like, right? Like, make it as difficult as possible. That's what we're aiming for, isn't it? In property in the UK.
Yeah,
find a way to make things more difficult.
Look, I think this government loves sound bites which sound like they're going to transform the market, like let's get rid of Section 21, when the reality is it's going to make fuck all difference. But do
you not think the markets are at their worst when the government meddles, or there is meddling in general? Like some of the biggest, I'm going to drop my first swear, I think, but the clusterfucks that we have to deal with is when there's been meddling on a macro scale which doesn't understand the micro impact of what that is. So Rowan, you talked about the stamp duty hard stop for the discount. It was without any understanding of what pressure that was going to put on the conveyancers, the surveyors, the mortgage market, the estate agents, the buyers, the sellers, like
the removals firms.
The removal
That's what we could get removers on the 31st.
I don't think government were completely unaware of that. But they couldn't have announced a deadline with a rollover, because then we would have all treated the rollover as the deadline. So I don't necessarily know that they didn't know. They announced it, it worked, and then at the last minute they went, cool, we're going to lose a load of transactions, let's extend it, done.
There's no solution,
I don't know that there was a better way they could have done it without getting rid of it indefinitely. There was always going to be a cut-off point, right? And the cut-off point is always in sales, with the delightful, easy, quick journey that sales is. You know, there was always going to be that cliff edge.
Yeah, I agree, and there has to be a stop point. I guess my point is on the broader side of, is the meddling necessarily going to bring about better conditions within the market, or better transactional volumes for the long term? Because quite often what we've seen is when there's meddling, you get huge spikes in prices, or you get huge transactional increases, but then it drops off the face of a cliff. And actually that it's when the market is left to transact at its own pace that it's actually some of the better markets or certainly that I've traded in, you know, when we've had long periods of very little interference. So if you look post crash 08 and recession, at that point it was very little meddling until you got through into the sort of mid-teens of the 2000s. And actually that market transacted quite nicely, you know.
On the sales side, do you think there has been a lot of meddling? I mean, what do you think the government, because look, anyone who knows me knows lettings is my bag, so I don't ever pretend to be an expert on the sales side of things. The government are loving meddling with lettings right now.
We are going to get there. Don't worry.
If you want to talk about
there.
doing stuff that sound good and mean nothing and quite often achieve the opposite of the intended goal, I think we're going to talk about this more later. But I mean, have they meddled with sales a lot? I mean, apart from that, I mean, obviously the pandemic, no bloody choice. They had to deal with a ridiculous situation, and you know, they had no choice there. They did what we did, and I think
the meddling.
We were lucky, right? We got given the golden ticket, as opposed to a lot of businesses throughout COVID and lockdowns. So,
Rowan, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, I think that the meddling does always seem to be around stamp duty, but you're right. Coming back to what Ben said at the intro to this, it's general election coming up next year, and that's where they tend to roll it out. So it tends to be this thing they dangle as a vote winner, and that's where I'm never sure whether it's particularly thought through. And it's what's the reason for it? It'd be interesting. I don't know what goes into the treasury from stamp duty every year, but actually, if you just allow the market to do what it does, I don't know, probably the increased amount of transactions and the VAT that you get off a transaction won't necessarily account for what you lose in stamp duty. But over the course of time, I think it would just allow the market to find its level and find its own pace in whatever market. And that's where I think that stamp duty reform is I don't know. I've always thought it, but I also do agree if there is going to be a tax, perhaps it should be on the sellers rather than on the buyers, because it seems to be the sellers are getting the benefit of what perhaps capital growth they've had over 3 or 4 or 5 years. If it is a growing market, of course, and if it's a decreasing market and then a seller's got to pay stamp duty, then perhaps that then is a barrier to sale.
But in theory, also, if the buyer's got as much cash as possible, in theory, they can offer.
And that's what happened, right? So when the stamp duty was
1-to-1, but if it's mortgage, they're leveraging that.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. You take away 15 grand that someone's got to find up front for a stamp duty, and it increased property prices by, you know, I mean, all of a sudden someone's got an extra £150,000 borrowing power potentially. So and that's what happened. So prices went up naturally as a result of stamp duty being stopped. It's whether you agree that property prices going up is a good thing. And actually, I'm a weird estate agent because I don't necessarily think that. I think a nice steady increase is good, but when it jumps, it causes all sorts of problems down the line.
I can see us going off in a very we're about to fish over to somewhere where we need to avoid here because we've got a couple more subjects to go into. And I was just going to have a rant about, do you even think, well, we won't do it. I was going to ask you all, what do you think on the incentive post-COVID? Was that what fueled price increase, or was property prices increasing, or was it 4 years of Brexit and this bottleneck, or was it all of it? But we'll save that for another time because this is what happens every week where just talk about random stuff, and we're here forever. And obviously, people love a 3-hour podcast, but you know, I know you guys have got appointments later, so I don't want to hold you on. So let's get on to number 2, state of the lettings market. I'm just going to go with that. I'm not going to waffle. I'm going to pass over to Kristjan, who is outright one of the letting experts in this country. He's not particularly opinionated, which makes things difficult. I'm not sure we're going to get much out of him on this, but Kristjan, can you just, because I think lots of people in the estate agency or lettings, and so actually maybe our estate agency colleagues are not quite in tune with just how wonderful the lettings market and the conditions we find ourselves in based on the last bloody 10 years. They're not quite in tune with where it is right now. Could you tell everyone how easy it is out there right now?
So look, I think like any market, when we talk about market nationally, it's waffly bollocks. There is no national average to any market. So it is still regional. I think the hiatus in London has definitely cooled off. We've seen that from the start of the year. But the previous 18 months were ridiculous. I mean, we were literally having to pull listings within an hour of putting them online because we would get 50, 60 inquiries in an hour. And all viable tenants, or just nuts. Like literally the whole office froze every time we listed a property. you know, and I know that I'm talking to a lot of agents. A lot of agents I know very quickly tuned into the fact that all of a sudden you don't need to list all your stock, because actually listing all your stock causes problems, because you list 5 properties and you get 60 inquiries per property, 300 inquiries. Guess what? Your entire operation freezes. But you can only do a deal with 5 of those people. So, you know, I've seen some really clever things happen where agents started thinking not in the typical attitude of, oh my God, I must list every single property I have to show everyone what an amazing portfolio I have. And you suddenly got people going, oh, do you know what, actually, I've got 3 2-beds coming up, all within like 20% of the same price. So I'm just going to list 1, because that will give me 60 people and I only need 4. So I think it created a shift. I mean, there's definitely regions in the country where the heat is still on. I've got friends out in Hertfordshire. I'm heartbroken for them. I mean, they're family with 2 kids. They were in the same house for 4 years, obviously on quite a suppressed rent. Landlord turned around and went, look, guys, loved having you here, but reality is I could now get 50% more rent. So look, you're welcome to stay if you're okay with that price, which they absolutely couldn't afford. So they were served notice. The landlord was actually a church, so they tried to do right by them. They gave them 3 months notice rather than the 2. They then gave them a 2-month extension. But in that 5 months, they went and saw 65 properties. They offered on about 30, and they lost out on every single one. And they're now, she's had to move home with the kids. Her partner is in temporary accommodation provided by the council whilst they try and figure out where they're going to live. So, you know, it has created a crisis in certain areas. But generally for landlords, I mean, it's nice for them to have some good news against the sort of barrage of bad news they seem to be getting in the press about the Renters Reform Bill. And the changes already implemented and the changes on the way. There's been a lot of scaremongering about what is coming down the line. On one side, we are seeing the biggest easy word to say, legislative, there we go, change of the last 30 to 40 years in lettings. The reality is, though, despite all of those changes, which is going to be an admin ball ache for all of us, the change to the market is going to be minute. So case in point, if we take Section 21s, so you look at all your tenant action groups like your Gen Rents, your Acorns, your, you know, all the more militant tenant rights groups, and they have championed the removal of Section 21 for the last 4 years as this sort of halcyon of you know, tenant benefit of removing Section 21. And the reality is, when you drill down into the data, I don't really understand why they feel this is such a big win. And we've obviously got Scotland as a case. You know, it's often said in lettings, if you want to know what's coming down the line in England and Wales, just look at Scotland, because they're typically about 4 or 5 years ahead of what's coming. And they've done that. And there was all the scaremongering about what it would mean to landlords. And the reality is it meant very little to landlords. Because when you drill down into the data, 85 to 90% of all tenancies are ended by the tenant, right? Then there's about 3%, which is sale of property. That's still going to be protected. There's about 2%, which is reoccupation, which is going to be protected. And then you've got about another 3%, which is eviction. So we're left with about 2% of the market. There's about 2% of the market out there that potentially, as tenants, can benefit from Section 21 being removed. But then when you look at that 2%, you go, right, okay, so another bizarre sort of misnomer in the tenant rights groups is this belief that there are a substantial number of landlords out there who get rid of good tenants paying fair money because they can get an extra £30 a month or £50 a month out of someone else. And any of you who've worked in lettings, I saw SJ chuckling away to herself there. No landlord does it. You always keep a good tenant over the unknown. Once you factor in the voids and the maintenance things to do between a tenancy, and the new tenant's ultimately going to probably have a request, oh, can you change the bathroom light, and can that wall be repainted, and you know, can we get a new sofa or whatever it is? Once you factor those things in, no landlord's kicking a tenant out. You know, and also quite often structure of agent fees, quite often agents letting and management fees go down considerably over time as well. So once you look at the fee increase going back to full fees for a new tenancy, you factor all those things in, no landlord with an iota of business sense is kicking out a decent tenant paying close to market rate.
So just Kristjan, are you telling me that these sort of militant groups and the charities are backing them? Are you telling me there's some sort of spin around the data here? Is that what you're trying to say?
I think what's really sad, like drilling down into it, you know, really what they are there to campaign for is to protect tenants. And I think that I'm not against tenant right groups at all. And there are ones who take a slightly more middle road, the likes of Crisis, who really understand the balance of play between tenants and landlords, and that any legislative changes need, oh, I got it right that time, need to actually get it. There needs to be a balance. It can't be all one way, or it doesn't, the market doesn't work. You know, I've completely forgotten the point I was going to.
You were so pumped that you got legislative out in one go that everything else means nothing now.
Yeah, it's that the point I was going to make is absolutely left my brain.
Listen,
so sorry, tenant right groups are there to ultimately benefit tenants, and I think what I genuinely think will come out of removing Section 21 is I actually think there will be a far more negative impact on tenants than there will be benefits to. And the reason for that is that what you will find with the removal of Section 21 is landlords and agents will be more cautious about who they rent to, because they have no end term. I mean, obviously you can still do your annual rent increases, but there will be no end term. The backlog in the courts, I mean, the courts are already crippled. When Section 21 goes, that will get worse. I think in large parts of the country, you will be insanely lucky to get in front of a judge within a year of filing papers.
So we've got on this, we've got London, we've got Oxford, we've got Yorkshire, and the first thing you said is there's no national, you know, the national data. It drives me around the bend when people quote national statistics, because you know we've got three very different areas, three very different markets, and I think that's quite interesting for anyone to hear how the world is behaving in three different areas of this country. SJ, so Kristjan's given us a really good overview of the position we find ourselves in right now. What's happening up in Yorkshire? Is it the same, you know, that example of a 50% rent increase is just, it's awful actually. When you hear the story and you think about a family impacted in that way, there's no, you know, it is awful. You know, and it's almost embarrassing that in this day and age, we found ourselves in a society that's allowed a housing system to become this. Is it the same up in Yorkshire at the moment? And actually, if you could lead on with, how have we got here? Because Kristjan's given us the where we are right now, but why do you think we are where we are right now?
Well, okay, so state of the lettings market in Yorkshire, I'm probably about 12 months out of date. So we sold our lettings portfolio last year, but up until that point, that was my sort of section of the business that I nursed through. We did experience the same thing in 2021, early 2022, one property listed, 50, 60, 70 people wanting to get through to view it. It was mental. You couldn't satisfy the demand. And not only that, people were then taking the mentality of the sales market and applying it to lettings. So you'd advertise a flat for rent at 800 quid and you'd be getting offers of 1,100 quid for it. Well, I mean, it was insane. And then your landlord expectations in and around the rent that can be achieved on those figures just goes through the roof. So because you had this pocket of crazy interest. And then when properties were then coming up for relet 6-12 months down the line, you were then saying, well, I can get you rent of 900 quid, or I can get you rent of 950, and they're like, well, that's really disappointing, you got 1100 quid last time. Well, it is, but it isn't, because it's realistic, and what you got last time was just insane. So we definitely experienced something very similar. From what I've heard anecdotally, the market is performing quite nicely, but I wouldn't say I'm in a position to give you an accurate opinion on that. I think one of the reasons we've ended up in such a complex position with lettings nationally, from what I've seen over the years, is because we've had so long with such loggerheaded opinions coming from such different angles, and nobody trying to mitigate that in between, nobody trying to arbitrate those arguments to come to some mutually acceptable position that people can move forward. We've talked about this sort of stamp duty issue of is it buyers or sellers that need to pay for it. We've got similar issues in lettings, and it's not around stamp duty, it's just these polar opposite of opinions are coming from such different points of view. Tenants are looking for homes, emotional attachments, places that they can potentially bring families up, or the start of a new relationship. It's exciting, it's fun, they're moving in together, or it's their first place that they're going to live in when they're away from home because they want student digs for uni or whatever it is. These are emotional decisions still that are being made. And then on the other side of it, you have landlords that are making level-headed business decisions and that don't always take into account the emotional attachment that's in there. And I think because you've had these loggerheads, these contrasting opinions, and no consistent guidance centrally, I come back to my meddling point, is, what is it, 12 housing ministers we've had in the last 8 years or whatever it is. I can't remember what the number is. It's off the charts in terms of the numbers of housing ministers we have. We've had no consistency, be that through lettings or through sales. There's been zero consistency, and we've got the run up to the election, so there's going to be more press about, we're going to do this amazing new thing. The Renters Reform Bill has been on the agenda for the last 3-4 general elections.
4 years, haven't we?
Yeah.
Well, they announced removal of Section 21 in 2019, right? It's taken them 4 years to kind of get there with that, but I think with a lot
they
of
also admitted in the general election prior to that, so it's been on the agenda for like 12 years. This Renters Reform Bill.
Queen's speech in 2019, wasn't it? It was
So
I think it's still the nuances, right? It's not the headline stuff. So you look at another thing like this proposal of periodic tenancies from the start. So the fact that a tenant will not be obliged to, if it goes through as proposed, a tenant will only be tied to a minimum 1 month term. That's it. Which on one side, you look at that and you go, oh, great, gives tenants flexibility. They can come and they can go. How many tenants actually want to leave after a month or two? Looking at the stress and the expense of moving. Yeah, I don't know. I've had tenants, we don't do break clauses. We always do 12-month minimum terms typically. We'll occasionally have tenants ask about a break clause, but once you explain to them by not having a break clause, they also get the security of the landlord not being able to serve notice. End of story. They're happy with that security. But when you look at the nuance of removing that, so probably don't get this so much in Yorkshire, because I would imagine the lets are a bit more cleaner, and I know quite often the lets, you won't have appliances or furniture in a property. Quite often it will be kind of just sort of the
box.
Whereas in London,
living in a box. Wow, what an advert for Yorkshire that is a clip
she
there.
sold the
Move
portfolio now. She doesn't care.
Live in a box. I can't wait. I'm on the way. SJ, get me a box lined up. I'm on the way.
I'll sing it to you as well when you get here.
But I think in London, where you get properties with appliances, with furniture, with all this sort of stuff, right? It is not uncommon for us. In fact, I would say probably at least half of the offers we receive on properties will be a conditional offer. Oh, we offer X, Y, Z, but we would like this room repainted. We would like the landlord to provide a sofa. We would like X, Y, Z. Ultimately, it's a business transaction, right? So the landlord goes, right, you're offering me £2.5 grand a month on a 2-year contract, and you've asked me to spend £2.5 grand improving the property. Cool, done. I will spend that. You get offered £2.5 grand with no commitment at all, and I want you to spend £2.5 grand on the property. Guess what? Landlord's going to turn around now and say no, because what if you leave in a month's time and the next person doesn't want a sofa or doesn't want the room painted that colour? or whatever it is. So, you know, it's things like that. And you know, I've probably been involved in 5 or 6 briefings with DLUC around the Renters Reform Bill being pulled through the process, either through Lettings Advisory Board or the Lettings Industry Council or other entities. And one thing we've tried to convey them is understanding things like that, you know, and what we've tried to do is also try and offer them solutions. So I've equated that to, in the commercial market, you have the Landlord and Tenant Act, which was introduced to protect commercial landlords from having someone set up a really successful business and then going, right, off you pop, and replicating their successful business in the property. So that was brought in for that. But importantly, in commercial law, as a tenant, you can choose to opt out of that protection. And so the office we rent for base, our landlord who owns a ton of property around here, they will not grant anyone more than a 5-year lease. And they will only sign it on the condition that as a tenant, you sign an opt-out of the Landlord and Tenant Act. That's how they work. You want to be in their property, take it or leave it. That's how it works. And ultimately, that gives the tenant an option. So I feel like if they do the periodic, great, but the tenant should still potentially have the option to opt out, to say, you know what, I'm willing to commit to a 12-month term.
Yeah.
Because the landlord's going to give me X, Y, Z if I do. And so this is the thing with a lot of these changes going through, and look, it's got a long way to go. What is it, like a 12, 13 step process to go through the House of Commons and then through the House of Lords and then final amendments and ascendancy. So this probably isn't happening for a year. But
Rowan, I know you're also a lettings expert. And I know you were particularly excited to hear that we were going to be discussing the state of the lettings market in today's session.
Sorry, you're talking to me?
Yeah.
I'm a sales agent, but I do own a lettings business as well. I just have people who do it for me who are experts. That's all.
Those people over there.
But you know, by a process of osmosis, I'm understanding what's going on. I think. And actually, the Oxford market, I think, is, well, it sounds like the Yorkshire market is similar to the London market. We can't put a property on and not have it under offer within, you know, a day, really, because of the influx of inquiries. But we're not just Oxford. We're Oxford, which is a city. We're Southmoor, which is a village about 10 miles away from Oxford, and then Swindon, which is a town, a much more sort of working town, perhaps, than Oxford, where it seems like it should be a totally different market on the face of it. But we just stuck one in Swindon 3 days ago, and we had 15 viewings booked before the close of play. So I think the market, it just seems like the national picture is the same. I'm not really hearing any different stories anywhere. And the trouble I have with the rent reform bill is whether or not it's really bringing anything in that couldn't just be achieved under current enforcement if things were just enforced. So apart from the Section 21 thing, but even with, in fact, what you were talking about, the opt-out, Kristjan, before, I think the government brings in things that are good headlines, right? So making the maximum deposit 5 weeks. I think they wanted it to be 4 weeks, right? But there was a lot of debate and discussion and lobbying, and the maximum security deposit now is 5 weeks. And actually, tenants who come along who want to bring pets are saying, we'll happily pay more deposit because, you know, we understand that our landlord's not, you know, potential landlord's not going to want.
And government were warned, right? Government were warned.
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
so you almost think, well, that would be an opt-out, but you can't really bring an opt-out in for that because it would then be abused. So, this is my whole issue with reform in general is it doesn't get thought through, and then it doesn't get debated by the right people. It gets debated in Parliament, and those people aren't experts.
The problem is the advisory groups are useless. Kristjan, you sit on any?
You're not bleeping now, you're blurring.
I'm making Ben work for his money when he edits this one.
Well played, yeah. Oh, well, I'm going to get a bleeping fuck you. You're absolutely right. We all know it, and there's a common theme, isn't there? The intervention piece is very rarely thought through, and I without being someone that rants about politicians more than he should, is that we've we've got people that lack the experience in decision-making roles.
I think the other problem with politics, right, and this is the problem since the dawn of time in politics, right? It's ego, right? A lot of people go into politics because of the ego trip of being this big character.
Power,
that does
yeah.
things. And I think, you know, when we were engaging with DLUC early on with the Renters Reform Bill, and we were really pushing back, like Rowan just said, we were pushing back a really strong message of stop adding laws. There's enough laws. We've got actually quite a good structure of laws, but they just need to be enforced better. There needs to be proper funding. There needs to be proper enforcement. And let's be honest, probably 70–80% of that enforcement can be done digitally. Like the amount of tech and leveraging AI and everything else now, you know, the fact that we've got a national trading standards team that covers the entire country and is 5 people. I mean, mental.
So yeah, it's too many people. Yeah.
But sorry, I was just quickly, my point about egotism with politicians is we were like, look, it ain't broke, don't fix it, just tweak it, just add some more money. We did a lot of stuff around property MOTs, so digitizing a lot of the legislative compliance, particularly around safety. And we were like, look, just work with what you've got and just kind of just juice it up a bit. But the trouble is, politicians don't want to be seen to be piggybacking off someone else's ideas and proposals and legislation. They want to come up with something new that they've invented. And
they need their headline, right?
They need their headline, and they need to say, I made that happen. I got rid of Section 21.
But they don't learn, do they? Because they need their headline, and their headline today is idiot does X, Y, Z. And in a year's time, the headline is that thing the idiot did. Yep, it's come to bite him in the arse.
Yeah.
How often does a government policy, when it impacts housing, when it impacts healthcare, how often do they get it right? Look at the track record. You know, yeah, you know what? I'm going to stop myself. It's about to be one of those rants. I'm going to wind it back in.
Okay, all right, Ben, here we go then. Let me give you my favourite irony in and around the deposits and pets, right? So tenants can't pay extra deposit to have a pet in the property, but they can pay a pet rent, which is non-refundable. So they can pay an extra 25 quid a month or a week or whatever to have a dog in a property, which simply gives the landlord more money.
Whereas the pot they would get back, right?
Whereas the deposit, if they
hand the property back, right, they get all that money back.
They can have all of that money back. But instead, what they did was say, no, we'll make it more accessible. So you don't have to pay extra in a deposit to have your pet there with money that's locked away that you can't get benefit of, but we'll allow you to pay rent to have the pet there. Like,
listen, you can't talk to politicians about money. You cannot. They can't process their own goddamn expenses. So how are you expecting to deal with other people's money? They can't handle their own. So, right, we are going to go. This is, we're creeping off down another route again, aren't we? Okay, so it seems like unanimously we're all in.
Come on, let's keep talking about politicians.
Unanimously, we are all in agreement.
Estate agents.
It feels
let's move on to journalists.
Hatchet job coming up here. It feels like unanimously we've agreed that the lettings market is in a really good spot. It's really easy to grow and landlords have got it easy. And yeah, so this is good. This is good news. That will be a clip up.
I think really importantly though, as an industry though, you've got to, with all the lettings changes coming, there's a lot of hype and a lot of hysteria in the media. And as agents, it's our job to rationalize what's coming down the line, to help our landlords understand the reality. Not the big punchy headlines that they're going to read in the Times and the Telegraph about how Gove is destroying buy-to-let. And is this the end of, I mean, fuck me, some of the headlines of the last few weeks around lettings are ridiculous. It's really important that we are the voice of reason. And I think one thing that's worried me is I've seen quite a lot of agents being as hysterical as the media headlines are. That's not going to help you. That's not going to help your clients, and it sure as fuck isn't going to help your business. So if you're panicking, calm it down and think it through. But I also think this is a huge opportunity. It's one of the biggest opportunities of the last 30 years to really enable you to leverage your expertise as an agent, educate and rationalize and calm your landlords to understand that, yes, there's a lot of change coming, but actually there's not a lot of change coming. You know, and this is why landlords need agents as well. It's a huge, at the moment, roughly 50% of all landlords don't use a letting agent. This is a massive opportunity to change that balance, because there are 50%, 2 million landlords out there who will be reading these headlines and thinking, shit, I don't know if I can handle all of this. I don't know if I'm ready to relearn all the stuff that I kind of probably didn't learn the first time round, and to put all of this stuff in place. And I think there has never been a better time. And with rents higher, and yes, a lot of landlords are facing higher costs because of mortgage rates, but with rents higher than they've ever been, there's a really strong message as well about, that being able to be absorb the cost of letting and management, and landlords being able to hand that over to an expert who gets it, who's been there and done it for the last 10, 15, 20 years and knows exactly, or more or less, how they're going to navigate the next 5. So I think it's a massive, I think contrary to a lot of the media headlines, I think the current changes are one of the biggest opportunities for letting agents this country see.
I completely agree. One issue I take is that very few people are framing it in this way. There's not enough people having this conversation, not enough people having this conversation in a forum where people can pick up on the dialogue. We say something in our business that all that experience, all that expertise that you've built up over the years, that wonderful CV of experience that makes you an expert, you don't have that on the CV for the easy times. That's on the CV for when times get tough or something comes around the corner that maybe people don't see coming or they're not comfortable with, that you can step up and be the knowledge that they need. You can be the experience. You could be the peace of mind that they desperately need in this time of, I don't know, scaremongering, this time of fear, this time of the unknown. There's such an opportunity for great agents to leverage this position in a way that, it's not even salesy. Don't be, I like people that are salespeople actually, because that's our job. But actually, from a lettings perspective, being an expert when there's unknown, providing certainty, which I think you can do, massively valuable, huge opportunity. I think you're absolutely right to say it, Kristjan. And I just hope that more people start to talk in this way. And we just quash the nonsense that is everyone's petrified. Well, you're petrified that your landlord's going to leave, but we've just heard an example of a landlord putting his rent up by 50%. Is that enough to scare landlords away?
As you just said, then tough markets are good for good agents. Easy markets are shit. You said on the last podcast about the fact your 7-year-old daughter could have sold a property in the sales market as it was. Probably couldn't have handled the conveyancing, but definitely could have done the viewings and
there's the rabbit hole that we're about to disappear down again. But you're absolutely right.
Tough markets, right? Easy markets, sales or lettings. Yeah. That's when you get every Tom, Dick, and Harry coming in. Fees drop because particularly the poorer agents coming in. I'm very happy to convey that it's a seller's market. It's a pile of P. We just need to put it on Rightmove and get people through your front door, and everything takes care of it.
$999 up front.
Yeah, exactly.
Easy markets make weak agents, tough markets build strong agents.
Yeah.
If taking that approach, and I hand on heart believe that, that's your ability to display your point of difference. And don't even get me started on the sales conveyancing process, because I would even argue now in tougher market conditions from a sales perspective versus the last couple of years, which pretty much every market in the history of the world has been. But let's describe them as slightly tougher. The selling of the property is not where you earn your crust. And yet that is what it seems like 99% of agents want to talk about. My marketing is sexy and wonderful, and my exposure, and in our own business, we do the same. It's really important. But where we earn our crust is all the experience. When we go under offer, that's where it can hit the fan in a minute and things can fall apart like you would not believe. And that's where we earn it. But
it is something Perry Power's always done well at Power Bespoke. They've always done a lot of data around, this is the average time to sell, this is the average time we sell a property in, and not under offer completion. This is the average sale price or market value, this is what we're currently getting. This is the average fall through rate. This is our fall through rate, and really drilling down. And they're not the only ones, they're the ones that come first to mind. But I know Perry's been doing that within Power Bespoke for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, taking very, very data-led And yes, it's the sexy stuff that gets you in the door and gets a client excited. But then once you get through the threshold, then you start drilling down into the reality of, do you really want to be dealing with an agent who you can't get hold of half the time, 6 months down the line, and everything falls apart?
But that's part of the building of the understanding of the why, though, isn't it, Kristjan?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of agents forget to understand the why for the client. And once you understand the why, you can then talk about the bit where you really matter, because you make the why happen. So I have to move because there's another baby coming. I have to move for work. I have to move for health. Well, there's the why. Well, this is why you need me. Then this is where I come in. I think more people spent more time understanding the why, then you can really demonstrate the value that you offer off the back of not working on, minute fixed fees.
Questions rather than dictating to people. Understand the consumer, and you can provide a solution to the problem that they're currently experiencing. But as estate agents, I just said I like salespeople, but the trap is so many salespeople fall into that. Well, I'm just going to talk at them. I'm going to tell them what we do. I'm going to tell them how we do it. And there's a lack of specificity. And so you're not necessarily solving their problem. You're too generic. And because of that generic approach, you don't provide any sort of point of difference, anything that really, really works. Rabbit hole, isn't it? I can see Ryan laughing. He knows full well we're just creeping off down any old track we fancy. And I'm conscious of time, as I am every, it's a constant. Let's get on to the final subject. We're going to knock this one out of the park nice and quick. So transaction volumes, sales transaction volumes are down. In April, they were down 8%. This is HMRC data. They're down 8% April versus March. They're down 25%. Transactions are down 25% in April 23 versus April 2022. Now I'm just going to do it right now. If I had it, this would be pouring syrup over waffle, because what a ridiculous set of data to look at. April 23 versus April 22. But it still made the news, and it was one of the most read stories, which means our estate agency colleagues are interested. Rowan, I'm going to come to you first. Pick apart this data, and you know what? Tell everyone why it doesn't mean anything.
Well,
so you are.
Picking it apart, it means fuck all, doesn't it? So Easter happens every year. It often happens in April. Maybe it always happens in April. I don't know. I'm not well versed when Easter comes around, but when Easter happens, the market drops away. I think what's more important statistic is understanding. So the 8% off March. What was April 22 off March 22, and what was April 21 off March 21? Yeah,
that's an interesting way to look at it.
So I mean, there's when people go on holiday. So when you talk about transactions, you talk about completions in April, or is this?
Yeah, this is completion data. So sorry. Let me just, before you go on, right, I think I've been a little bit cavalier with my statement. Why it doesn't mean anything, and I appreciate, of course, completions actually for estate agents, they are a requirement, because without those completions, money isn't coming in from the sales arm of the business. So I don't mean to say life is hunky-dory, we're not doing enough completions. That's not what I mean. But from a data perspective, I'm interested in everyone's view on how they see this data.
From a data perspective, so what I would be looking at is what the lag in sales going agreed to when sales are completing is greater than when I became an estate agent in 2005. We were still trying to push 28-day exchanges, and they were slipping to 6 weeks, and then it started to become an average of about 2 months from going under offer to completing. And now we seem to be looking at about 5 months, 4 or 5 months, and there's all sorts of things that we could discuss, and that's another rabbit hole, and I don't particularly want to go down it because I keep on getting myself in trouble. But the April date, if we look at when those offers were agreed, we were talking about November or something, right? So, and November was a particularly torrid time after the trust bomb went off, where for 2 months nobody was moving house, nobody was offering on anything. By November, I think mortgages had gone up from like 1.7% to, I don't know, 5.2% or whatever it was, and people just panicking and not offering. December is when we started to see property sales again. And that was odd in itself, because December's usually a quiet month for offers getting agreed, and those are now starting to feed through. So in fact, I've had a dearth of exchanges and completions for the last 2.5, 3 months, but now they're all starting to fall, fall through, not fall through in the wrong way, fall on the right side of the fence in the right way. in May, and we're looking into June and July as being positive months in terms of the fees going through, so i.e. completions. So I think there's a little bit of analytics to do with April, and understanding that it is a result of a poor market in numbers being agreed pre-Christmas and in the last quarter of last year, which was a political issue. And I just think that I think it's hard to look at completion numbers at all when the lag is so great. And it's even when, when people are talking about ONS data and what the market's doing, and it's dropped by 3.6%. But actually, if we're looking at, those are numbers that are 6 months old, or even 9 months old from when those offers were agreed. So, I think those are February's numbers for completions, and the market's already moved on a long way since then. Yeah. So I think, I don't know, I just try and analyse what's going on right now. And for me, instruction numbers, offer agreed numbers and fall through numbers are more important determinants of what's going on in the industry.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. First, I just got the trust bomb. I haven't heard it called that. That is a corker. I like it.
Trust bomb, trust grenade. Yeah.
Trust grenade. Yeah. I've been calling it a few other things, but yeah, there are certain elements of language we won't go with on the show, because everyone will, beep it or not, they'll know what I'm saying, and my mum will tell me off for using that word. But you're absolutely right, and in our own business, exactly the same experience as you. That couple of months following the trust bomb, tough times, under offer was tough. December life sort of, green shoots, if you like. And then I think lots of us have had really difficult springs in my own business. It's been really difficult from a cash flow perspective, from a pipeline conversion perspective. And then the last 6 weeks, things are starting to, the world is not hunky-dory and all wonderful again, but there's a lag. And so many of these stories, the headline doesn't talk about the lag. And I know, I don't want to patronize anyone, and you three are absolute experts in what you do. But think about how many agents aren't. And they really don't have the same level of experience as the four of us. And so that headline is scary, because the headline was something like, I don't know, I'm going to make it up. It was something that made you think, oh shit, there's nothing happening right now. The market has stopped.
But it should always be in context to a normal market, right? So average UK sales is somewhere in the region of about 800,000 transactions a year. That's roughly kind of a typical year. Very ballparky. The data running in to last year was that it was always going to be a bumpy year. All the data points showed that the estimations for last year were going to be transactions of around 1 million to 1.1 million, right? And that's pretty much what last year did. It hit very much in line with what the data expectations were. And those same data predictions around the sales market this year was that we would return to a normal market of 800,000. So guess what? Yes, the market compared to 1 to 1.1 million has dropped 25%. But what is really relevant is that it's dropped 25% back to normal volume levels.
The problem we've got is how many people decided to become estate agents in the last 3 years. And so they just don't know.
Lunatics.
Yeah, well, there's two windows for lunacy. The last 3 years are based on this podcast about 20 years ago. Loads of lunatics got in about 20 years ago. I don't know what, there's definitely something in that. But yeah, those guys, and so we've got in our own team, we've got a couple of guys that have been doing it for a few years. And this sounds like an egotistical statement. It's not intended to be, but because we're in a room together, they are getting the education on what the real world looks like and what life looks like when you aren't coming out of COVID and there are 0% interest rates. That's not normal life. But because they've only got 2 or 3 years experience, they think it's always like that. And so, oh my God, there are 25% less transactions. Well, that's okay. That's all right, because in 2017, 2018, 2019, everything was okay. It wasn't wonderful, but everything was okay. And again, like I said with the last news story, I feel like we have, us four, and the experienced quality agents out there, we have a duty of care to have this conversation, to talk people through this, to explain that it's not the end of the world. This is okay.
I think there's another point to make though, isn't it, in terms of encouraging people not just to spend time doing, but also to spend time understanding and analysing. So I think Peter Knight calls it working on the business, not in the business, right? So, working on your real-time data, you know, and Rowan talked about it. What are my sale agreed numbers? What's my gross sales to instructions ratio? What's my fall through rate? You know, what's my real-time numbers look like? And what do I need to do to influence those numbers? Have I got a pricing problem? Have I got an instruction volume problem? Have I got a fall through problem? Is there an issue in my sales progression team? And too many people get too wrapped up in just grinding through the jobs that are on the jobs list and not taking that time to sit back and look. And you can overanalyze your business. Absolutely. You can spend far too long in the data and not enough time doing, but the balance is often the other way. And that time that you can take, that hour to 2 hours a week, just stopping to look at the numbers and understand your own business a little better makes a huge difference.
Completely agree. Let me ask you a question, SJ. There's more and more self-employed agents out there now. And that model is exploding, you would argue, around the UK. And lots of them it's a low volume model, really. They're self-employed and they have their own business, but it's a much smaller business. Lots of them are only a couple of years in. So their data and their analytics, what they're looking at is probably what happened last year or the year before. Where should they be looking, do you think, to get a feel for what their business should be doing?
Well, there's a number of places. So we have some self-employed agents at Preston Baker. Okay, so we have a blended approach. We have some employed, we have some self-employed. And so there's different data sets, so they can use the employed data. We have that, it's available for them. We offer mentorships with them, so we can sit and help them understand that data, help them go through it. But there's also swathes of help out there. You know, we talked briefly before we sat down about agents together. You know, there's mentorships for free that are out there that you know, people can sign up for. There's groups like the Property Academy, Agent Rainmaker. There's all sorts of different places that they can go for support and help, but they have to want to be helped. They have to want to support, and they have to want to look in the mirror and have the mirror shown up to them and not always see the reflection that they wanted to see. And sometimes it's a bit ugly for a while before you realize, okay, right, I got to do this, I've got to do that, I've got to change this, I've got to change that. And unless you're ready to have that mirror held up to you, you're going to be lonely and you're going to feel cut off. But there is help out there. There's lots of us that want to help and do help. You know, with agents that are new, fledgling, been going a couple of years, been going 10, 15 years, you know, I still get help regularly. Some say I need it more often, but, you know, get help.
We're in the same Property Academy group, and we've got 20 years experience each, and yet we show up every other month to be, you know, you could argue to be educated, to be mentored, to be coached, to have that dialogue. You know, yeah, I can't stress enough. It's a loaded question I've asked you, but I wanted you to talk about, you know, there's so many things out there that can help you. Last week, or maybe the week before, we talked about how much content there is online. Actually, you know, if you're, as an estate agent, not many are introverts, but they're absolutely out there. If interacting with other people around learning is not for you, jump online and find it. There's so much good stuff out there. Kristjan, final thought: transactions, help that people need if they want to understand the data. What's your phone number? Can they give you a call?
Look, I think just contextualize it. You know, if your business has been running a few years, if you're working in a larger business, as SJ talked about, understand it, and you touched on as well, Ben, understand the historical transactional data. Sit down with one of the senior experienced negs in the business. Sit down with your branch manager and talk it through. Understand, you know, we all know property's cyclical, right? Once you've been in this game long enough, you know you've got the peaks and the troughs. And the good businesses know how to leverage the peaks and ride out the troughs, right? And it's just, understanding that culture. And as you said, Ben, there's a lot of people who've come into the industry in the last 2 or 3 years, particularly in sales, and they think it's always going to be that easy. And I think, look, same in lettings as well. I'm sure there are people who've joined lettings negotiations. They're like, this is ridiculous. You know, it's not going to last. It's not always going to be like that. But I think as owners, managers, I think we have to be careful in those good times not to get carried away and not to let our teams get carried away. Don't let them take too much credit for what the market's doing. We do need to applaud our staff and give them a pat on the back, but let's not let them get too carried away that they're some sort of selling superstar when really we know the reality of the matter is 80% of that success is coming out of market conditions. We all know it's the tough markets where people really prove whether they've got what it takes. So, but yeah, look, context. It is all about context and understanding that cycle, understanding that you're going to have those years where you're smashing it and bringing in some really nice commissions and bonuses, and other years where it's going to be a bit lean. And you know, that's where you earn the good times, is in the tough times. So yeah.
Okay, thank you guys. 3 news stories, 12, maybe 13 rabbit holes explored. That was excellent. Bit of politician bashing, lovely. Let's segue nicely into a new section. We talked about Agents Together a little bit just a moment ago. So we've got Sam from Agents Together who's going to pop up now, and every week he's going to talk to us about some issues that mentees are working through right now, and we're just going to ask you guys for some advice, so what you might offer. So let's get Sam queued up and ready to go. Sound quality is absolutely not an issue here, I can assure you.
Hello, Pasta Syrup guests. So I've had lots of mentees talk to me this week about career development. So my question to you is, what advice would you give them to help them take control of their career and move it forward?
High quality stuff. He's a videography legend, a mentoring legend, and it's a great question for 3 so-called experts. No, just kidding, guys.
For those at the back who couldn't hear the question, then what was?
I'll just repeat it for you, because there was a 747 overhead at the time, which may have made it difficult. So mentees this week, there's been a lot of feedback on how best to progress their career. How do they take charge of progressing their career in property? What advice would you give to someone who's career-minded? They're early, I think, into the journey, and they want to move forward. What advice would you 3 give? Sort of 30-second snippet, something they could do, maybe some actionable, maybe something about what you've done, or you advise others. Ryan, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll go from a sales point of view rather than lettings, because my career's really been sales, and it's so when you were talking about how easy the market's been over the last 2 or 3 years, and how young estate agents can feel, it's so easy to sell and everything's selling. It really is easy. It can be easy to sell. It's always kind of easy to sell. The difficulty and the job is listing. So it's about getting your head around listing, building stock for yourself or for your company, if you're employed. And I would say the way to do that is to position yourself as an expert, someone who knows what they're talking about, and get yourself out there offering advice. So not putting yourself on video going, look at this house we've just sold, but put yourself on video, telling people a story about why that's interesting to the market, how it benefits this local community, how it can benefit that person that might be watching this video, and understanding what the value of their house might be and how the journey could be for them, and making yourself an authority in your local area. Okay, that is fantastic advice. So huge. Yeah, I guess what we're talking to people that are in roles where they're not doing as much work on the listing side, and so if that's the natural step, get yourself in a position to be an authority where you can work in that area of business. Video. Cannot say it enough. Absolutely amplifies who you are. Kristjan, your piece of advice?
For me, I'm going to go more generic. For me, I think my number one thing is find your tribe. Know who it is you want to be as an agent. Do you want to be a Muppet who wears Viking helmets and turns up to valuations in t-shirts and trainers, or do you love rocking up in a 5-star car, suited and booted, doing that stuff? Know who you are, know how you want to operate, and then go and find the company that aligns with that, or start it, one or the other. But I think find your tribe, get yourself around you, because it's not, when you find your tribe in that respect, it's not just about the people you work with. You also attract the kind of clients that you will get on with as well, and I think that's definitely something. When we started Base 19 years ago, we very much set out with a very strong idea around the fact that we wanted to do things the way we wanted to do things, and we didn't really know what that meant yet, but we knew that we didn't just want to follow the norm. We knew we didn't want to have everyone mandated being suits and clean shaven, and because that wasn't us. I have nothing against that. If that is your bag, awesome. But I think nowadays, not just business model, but you look at the identity of a state agency out there now, and we have got such an amazing spectrum from the sort of one-man individual agents. You've got the franchise things. I really like what Mr. and Mrs. Clark are doing in terms of their branding. You've got the likes of Modern House, which has taken a very we are absolutely not a state agents approach, and gone very sort of interior design and architecture led. Like there are so many out there. You've got the likes of Location, who go very much kind of company culture, community engagement. You've got the likes of Stories doing like industry leading property style videos. You know, I think that would be it. Find that culture where you feel included and part of it, and the rest of it will fall into place. The rest of it will happen. But if you stick yourself in a business where that doesn't work, it doesn't matter. It's never gonna work out long term. You're not going to be as happy or as successful, or both, without that. So yeah, that's my biggie. That's my biggie. Find your tribe.
Okay, great advice. Very good. If you go back 20 years, state agency all pretty much looked the same, didn't it? You know, and now, as you point out, the world has moved on so much, listed off a whole load of different businesses that do things in very different ways. So you can actually find your tribe. You can find the sort of business. There's very few, I would imagine, people that can't, that you're so strange you can't find someone that you'll get on with. I'm sure we don't have that many oddballs in this industry, other than, present company not included.
But even if you are that weird, start an
well, I
agency
mean,
that's bloody weird. There'll be other weirdos out there.
There are weirdos, and if there aren't, be your own weirdo.
Exactly.
As exactly as you pointed out,
Weirdness.
go for it. Okay, SJ, big finish. What's your advice?
I'm going to build on what Kristjan said. And once you've found your tribe, you have to know your goal, and you have to review that regularly, and you have to contribute towards it. So one of the things I've been really guilty of in the past is wanting something more for someone else than they want it for themselves. And they have to want it, and they have to work at it. And so one of the things that I do with the team now is every month I ask them to review what actions they need to take this month to help them achieve their career goal. And then in return, what actions I need to take to support them to achieve their career goal. But I can't support them until they take action. And so unless you're reviewing that point regularly, unless you set a marker in the sand and said, hey, Kristjan, I want to do this by next year, or hey, Rowan, will you support me to do this by then? And you then contribute towards the success of that, or building towards that goal, and then ask for the help and support that you need, then you're never going to get there. So you have to be really clear about what the goal is. You have to be really clear about what you have to do to achieve that goal, and be really clear about asking for the support. And I think if you do those things, as well as finding your tribe, as well as making yourself hugely visible, then actually you set yourself up to be incredibly successful, in my opinion.
I love that, mainly because the three of us were like nodding dogs and like big smiles when you said you're guilty of, which all four of us clearly are, guilty of wanting it more than the person we're trying to support. That is so common. Such a great point you've made. That is so poignant. Yeah, really, really strong point. Well done, SJ. That's the clip of the podcast for me. The three of us going, yeah, she's absolutely right. You've nailed it. Okay, guys, that's great. So hopefully the mentees will have taken some value from that. Now we're going to do some rapid fire stuff. So firstly, best agent you've ever worked with, why they're such a great agent. And we'll highlight everyone we talk about now. We're going to highlight in the copy underneath the video, so people, hopefully, if they're on social, you can follow them, because other than these three legends who you should be following and seeing what they're doing online, everyone else, good people in the industry, such a great way to learn by just following people that do good stuff. So, SJ, let's go straight back to you. Who's the best agent you've worked with? Tell us a bit.
Hands down, James Danbury. He's a guy I started working with about 13 years ago. And you talked earlier, Ben, about the classic salesman, goes in, sells everything, like super confident, full of the chatter. James is not like that. He comes across incredibly shy, but he is one of the most successful salesmen I've ever worked alongside. He's kind, caring gentleman that you wouldn't think is going to sell you something. And he asks incredibly good questions and builds fantastic relationships with clients. And as a result, is hugely successful. I sound like I'm blowing smoke up his backside, but he is brilliant, and hands down one of the best agents I've ever worked with.
It's so refreshing, isn't it? Or you think it's refreshing until you watch every episode of this podcast and you realize that what the stereotype, this nonsense figure that people have in their mind. So no one's talking about those people being great agents, actually kind, caring, a gentleman, great questions, a relationship builder. We all know that's what great agency looks like. There's just a bit of a disconnect, I think, maybe with the consumer or the guys entering the industry, and I'm sure we're going to build on that. So we'll put James's details below. He sounds amazing, and that's great. Shout out to him. I'm sure, what was it, a 5 or a 10 he bunged you for that, the smoke that was blown, but pretty good stuff.
Dinner, he's paying for dinner, that's what he's doing.
Nice. Is that before you go back to your box in Yorkshire, is it?
Yep.
Okay, good stuff. Rowan, who's yours, mate?
It's the guy that interviewed me, my first ever interview, then employed me in a estate agency. His name's Mark Ewin. So he was the regional manager.
Before you go any further, are you suggesting that Mark's a legend because he interviewed and hired you? Is that it? Is that where we're going with this?
Oh, yeah, I suppose it's all about me, isn't it? Yeah. But
incredible eye for talent.
he was my regional manager at Abbott's Countrywide. So he was the Suffolk region, and he just seemed like an absolute authority on everything, and I guess mentored me, took me into listing within 3 months of becoming an estate agent. So I suppose that set me on my career path. And then he's gone on to set up his own agency in Bury St Edmunds. It's called Mark Ewin, and they are super successful, constant winner of the Estas for the East of England, I think, and just a real dynamite estate agent.
So apart from being an authority, he hired you and he got you listing.
I mean, that's really the main.
You managed to make this all about you.
Yeah.
So the authority thing, though, it's the quality, it's the experience, it's the delivery.
Yeah,
right?
and he was also really good at bringing me back. So I have wobbled every kind of 3 months in my career for the last 18 years, and for the first 5 years of that, Mark Ewin was there to just bring me back on track. And along with Angie Green, who was my immediate manager and the step under Mark. So those two estate agents in Abbott's built me as an estate agent, but always brought it back to basics. So whenever I lost my way, it was always about resetting myself, them resetting me and going, look, bring it back to basics. What have you stopped doing? What have you stopped asking? What were you doing 6 months ago when you were flying that you're now not doing because you become too busy? And it was that, and now I have to reset myself or pick up the phone to them. I haven't spoken to Mark for a while, but I still do it with Angie, who's now an EXP agent down in the south. So I am a mentor with Agents Together, but I'm still a mentee.
Yeah, good for you. Good for you. What have you stopped doing? Such a good question. Such a simple question. I don't know what's going on. I don't know, I can't seem to. What have you stopped that you were doing 3, 6, 9 months ago? Such a simple and good question. Kristjan, who's yours? I mean, don't say me. Like, let's mix it up. Let's,
Oh, shit. All right. Do you know what? There are a lot. I'm a self-confessed agency fart. I've loved it, particularly like the last 10 years, watching the evolution of our industry and what we've already talked about, different style of leadership, different styles. But if I had to pick one standout right now, it'd probably be Vicky Bibiris at Location. What her and Assad are building there, I think, is, for me, very aspirational. You look at how they present themselves as a brand. Their branding, their content is phenomenal. The culture, the commitment to culture and constantly reinvesting in the team, both from a professional development, but also personal development side, is incredible. Alongside that, you look at their community engagement, but like the fun things they do, like Valentine's Day, their branding is yellow. So Valentine's, they do the yellow roses every year. Genius, friggin' genius. And they video it beautifully. Vicky, for years now, has stipulated they will never, ever, ever have property particulars in their window. And they do the most awesome window displays. They do probably 7, 8 window displays a year, and they are mind-blowing. But do you know what? An animatronic werewolf around Halloween in the window tends to capture a few more eyeballs than 30 frigging illuminated A4 property particular cards. You know, she is not daft, that woman, and I'm very lucky to call her a good mate now. But she's one of many. There are a lot. The Spencer Lawrences, the God, I'm going to get in trouble for listing some and not
others. Yeah, so
there are a lot out there. But right now, for me, shining star Vicky and Assad and what they're attempting to build with location, and the team they're building around themselves. People like Megan, who I adore, Megan 18. You know, I think looking at the other end of the scale,
how old is she?
You're kind of up there leading. Megan,
Banter.
30,
Banter.
yeah, 34, I think. I'm probably going to get in trouble for getting that wrong. But, you know, Megan at the other scale, someone who's been in the industry well over a decade, but is so passionate, self-confessed lettings geek. She absolutely adores being a lettings geek. And I think that's absolutely brilliant, and shouting it from the rooftops. So, yeah, me waffling, I'm giving you 3 instead of
0 times 0.
there.
No, it's great. I mean, these are people that I genuinely, hand on heart, believe if people have been in the industry for years and years, but also people that are new to the industry, if you start following these people and see how they behave, you start to see that they're arguably what you thought this business was going to be versus what it could be. And that's you use the word aspirational, which I think is such a good word to describe a brand that is culture driven and trying to do things differently, not for the sake of differently, but for the sake of better. Because so much of today, different is just because we need to be different rather than for the right reasons. So some great people, common theme, all 3 of you, you're talking about 3 people that care. And I think that will come up time and time again. James, you described as a caring person. Mark cared about you because every 3 months he's pulling you back in line and helping you, be where you need to be. And Vicky absolutely cares about her team and the business and the people within her business. She's developing a culture that ensures they care. So
also, what I'd add is don't just follow these people, engage with them. Most of the people that I adore in agency, and there are too many to mention, operate a pretty open book. As long as you're not sat on the same high street going toe to toe with them on valuations, they pretty much offer an open book. I mean, for years, we've always said, you ever want to come and spend a few hours or a day in our offices with our team, you come and you can sit down with every member of team in our office. I will answer anything honestly about how we structure our ops, how we structure our fees for landlords, why we do this, why we do that. And I know, Vicky and I said location do the same thing. Spencer at Paramount does it. I mean, I think pretty much every other week there's someone who's gone into Paramount and has spent a day with the team there, whether they're a supplier or an agent, and they come away mind blown about things that they're going to implement in their own business. And I think for me, that's been the most exciting change in the last 10 years is 10 plus years ago, you'd meet any agent and you'd ask any agent how they were doing. And almost every fucking time they were smashing it out the park and everything was amazing. And 3 months later, they went bust. And I think what's refreshing now is a lot of those walls have come down and there's a lot more honesty. There's a lot more sharing. I think generally we've all come together and understand that, we share best practice, we share best, knowledge and understanding. We all get better and we all win because the public gets a better service, and slowly but surely that reputation will slowly creep up those rungs. Maybe we might get like 4th least liked profession out of our rock solid 3rd place. Who knows? But yeah.
So guys, final segment. Hit our timing perfectly. We're floating in. We're finishing 2 minutes early. Final segment is one great thing you would recommend agents do right now. Maybe it's one great thing you're doing in your business, or one thing you think could help in any way whatsoever, be it lead generation, be it conversion, be it conveyancing, be it cultural change within your business, anything you want. One great piece of advice, recommendation thing that you think agents should be doing right now. SJ, let's kick off with you.
I adopted a phrase at the start of this year, which I'm now living and breathing, which is be stubborn about my outcomes, but flexible about my methods. And that has allowed me to improve the accountability and the quality of what the guys are doing. because I'm giving them some freedom to be flexible about how they do it, but on the understanding that we will not compromise on certain levels of productivity. We will not compromise on certain standards. We will not compromise on the quality of the output of what we give to other bits of the business that we now support. And that, for me, in the last 3 weeks, Ben, you'll know that I've changed roles slightly, has been a godsend in terms of helping me achieve some of the outcomes that I've got.
Good. Very nice. Very nice. Kristjan?
Educate. Educate yourself, educate your team, educate your clients. Done.
Oh, mic drop. Done. Wow. Hold on. It's on. Have you got something underneath it there?
That did not go on smoothly.
Comfort.
Right, there we go.
Comfort. Rowan, over to you, sir, for the big finish. No
big
pressure,
finish.
but don't let us down.
Open yourself up to other estate agents, and if you're a director, get yourself along to dinner on the 15th with the Baldock brothers and all us other estate agent directors.
Oh, what a plug! What
Someone
a
got
plug!
himself a free beer.
Wow, yeah. I mean, I would be pushing for a free dinner for that one. Yeah, at least 12 people are going to watch this podcast. So good shout. That's another 12 guests. That is good work, Rowan. Be open to support and interaction. Yeah, great advice. Great advice from everyone. That brings us nicely to a conclusion. So because I have no idea what time we started, I'm thinking we could be anywhere between an hour and a half. I'm not good at telling the time. Just gonna pretend we did it as quickly as we thought we were going to. Thank you so much, guys. The three of you have been epic. I hope this has been valuable, helpful, something like that. As usual, I haven't said do the likes, do the engagement, subscribe, all that stuff. You're meant to say at the start, I say at the end. And at this point, nobody is watching the program. They've already turned off. So thanks, guys. See you soon.
Cheers all.